Hello, people of the internet. If anyone sees this, probably not. But if you happen to stumble upon this video, today we are going to be grading every team's free agency moves. I understand that there are still some big free agents like Aaron Rodgers still out there on the market, but we're going to be grading the moves that already occurred. And starting off, we're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. The honorable additions are they added DJ Moore, which for a second round pick, I think it was a little bit of a steep price for the wide receiver he is on the older side, but he can still play good football. Extended Dawson Knox and Connor McGovern. And then they paid Bradley Chubb a 3-year, $43.5 million deal. I think this is an alright deal. Obviously, Bradley Chubb isn't as dominant as he used to be, but I think his image was stained because he played for the Dolphins. I think he could still play at a high level. And then they also signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson, which is 50-50 if you're going to get a good season out of him. So I think I'm going to have him go with like a B because I think these additions were good. They weren't anything too amazing, but they solved some of their holes on the team. Next, we have the Dolphins. The first big one is Malik Willis. This is alright signing. They paid him 3 years, $67.5 million. Their first 2 years they're paying him like $14 million each, and then they're paying it all in the third year because they still owe Tua like $100 million. I don't think he deserves that. He played like 4 good games, and bro got paid because they were that desperate. But other than that, they didn't make any other major signings, and the Dolphins are in a rough spot. They lost a lot of people to free agency. They have no secondary. They have no edge rushers except for Chop Robertson. And then they got Jalen Waddle. They got a good running back room, but that's all they got. I'm unfortunately going to have to give them an F here. I don't think they accomplished anything too major here. Next, we got the team that just went to the Super Bowl but lost. We got the Patriots. They only made a few signings, and they lost more players than they signed. But their signings were meaningful, except for the fullback that they signed, but whatever. They signed Elijah Vera Tucker for their O-line, which need help, as we saw from the playoffs. I think he's a good player, previously with the Jets. Romeo Dobbs, they overpaid on him for a 4-year, $7 million contract. He's not a bad player. He's just been a wide receiver 2. I don't think he can step up to that wide receiver 1 role, but they kind of did this themselves because they chose to release Stephon Diggs. So I don't know what opinion I have on that. But then they also signed Kevin Byard for only a 1-year, $9 million contract to fill that hole of Jalen Hawkins leaving. And I think it's an alright pickup. He had a lot of picks. But yeah, it was an okay signing. I think I'm going to have him going with a C. I don't think these moves are going to get them back to the Super Bowl, but they weren't horrible. The Jets actually had a pretty alright offseason, I would say. They focused a lot more on the defense and the offense. An honorable mention, which I don't know why they did, only the Jets would do this. They traded a pick for Geno Smith. They're bringing back Geno. I mean, I guess he upgraded teams technically. He went from the worst team to the second worst team, so good for Geno, I guess. And then other honorable mentions is obviously they got Tavonde Sweat in that trade that they sent away Jermaine Johnson. Demario Davis they signed to a 2-year, $22 million deal. Nashawn Wright, that looked good for that first half with the Bears, to a 1-year, $5.5 million. Andre Sisco they re-signed for a 1-year, $5 million. And then they only traded a 7th-round pick for Minka. This is actually crazy because the Dolphins traded Jalen Ramsey for Minka last season, and then they just dealt him for a 7th-round pick. So, honestly, I don't think these moves are going to do anything crazy for the Jets, but I want to give it a B. Ravens, they have a controversial offseason because they originally traded for Max Crosby. Then they backed out of the trade, and people argue that it hurt the Raiders, but it actually hurt the Ravens more. They lost a lot of valuable players. They couldn't pay Tyler Linderbaum, which the Raiders ended up poaching, which is crazy. But then they did go out and get Trey Hendrickson for a 4-year, $112 million deal, which was going to be cheaper than Max Crosby. But I think that he's a worse player, and Max Crosby could have made this team a Super Bowl contender. And these pickups, these other ones, they had Chidobe Awuzie they brought back. They signed Jalen Hawkins from the Patriots, but if the Max Crosby deal went through, I think this would have been an A for them because it would have brought them to Super Bowl contention. But single-handedly for that, I'm going to have to go with C because it's just not the same impact from Trey Hendrickson. The Bengals actually made some alright moves once. They actually helped up the O-line and the D. So an honorable one, they signed Orlando Brown for the O-line, Dalton Reisner for the O-line, and then they actually got him pass rush out of Boye Mafe for a 3-year, $60 million deal, which isn't too bad of a deal for the player he is. And then they got Jonathan Allen for a 2-year, $26 million deal, so help up the middle of that D-line. And then they got Brian Cook to be their safety, which anyone would have been better than the players I already have. So actually, for the Bengals, I'm going to have to go with B. They actually addressed their two needs, the O-line and the deep. So good for them. Next, we got the Browns. Browns didn't actually do anything that important. They signed Quincy Williams, but they also lost Devin Bush. So I think they're like the same level of players. So that's just a substitution in. And then they helped the O-line with Elton Jenkins, Zion Johnson, Tevin Jenkins, Titus Howard, but overall, nothing too impressive. I mean, I'm just going to give them a D because they didn't get any wide receivers. They didn't actually, help the defense anything. So I'm just going to have to give them a D. Steelers, I'm actually going to have to give it an A. This may have been one of their best off seasons in the last decade. They signed Rico Dowdle because they unfortunately lost Kenneth Gainwell, which was their MVP last season, to only a 2-year, $12 million contract. He had that 2 stretch of games where he had like 420 scrimmage yards. I think his potential to back up Jaylen Warren. They got Michael Pittman in a trade with the Colts, which was essentially for free because they just did a pick swap where they sent over a pick and got a pick back. I don't know what the exact details were, but it was essentially just a pick swap with Michael Pittman on top of it, and they extended him to a 3-year, $59 million deal. They brought back Cam Hayward. They actually signed Jamel Dean, which I think is an underrated signing, to a 3-year, $36 million deal. He was actually the best man-to-man corner in the league last year, so I think this was actually a really good signing under the value that he should have been. Then they also signed Jaquan Brisker from the Bears for only $5.5 million for 1 year. I think it was good value. I don't know if he's the best safety, obviously, but he has upside, and I think that was a good sign. Texans, I would say they had an alright one. They patched up some holes. First, they started off with the David Montgomery trade. Rest in peace, Sonic and Knuckles. They helped with the O-line, but nothing too drastic. Evan Brown, Trent Brown, Braden Smith was the big O-line patch-up for them. They extended Danielle Hunter. They got Logan Hall. They re-signed Sheldon Rankins. And then another big one was Reed Blankenship from the Eagles. They separated the exciting whites. But I didn't even think that was that big of like a position that they really needed during the offseason, but they did it anyway. So I think this team actually got better. I'm going to give them a B. The Colts, I think, actually had a horrible offseason. I don't know if anyone thinks they had a good one. I think they got Daniel Jones on a 2-year deal. We saw he played good at the beginning of the season. I like this. But then they traded Michael Pittman and then re-signed Alec Pierce on a 4-year, $114 million contract. This dude has never had more than like 40 catches on a season. Why is he like the highest paid free agency wide receiver of all time? Like, I don't think he deserves this. And then they didn't really do anything on defense. And they were going to sign Trey Hendrickson before the Ravens swept in. So I actually think that the Colts didn't achieve anything to being closer to the Super Bowl. I think they actually went further back than they were last year. Jaguars are another team that they didn't lose too many players, but they also didn't sign anyone that important. So I'm most going to have them give them a C. Because I don't think they... Actually, I'm going to give them a D. Because they didn't really change anything on their team. But next we have the Titans. Another big spender for defense. Just like the Jets and later the Raiders we're going to look at. Their big offensive pickup was Wan'Dale Robinson on a 4-year, $78 million deal. Same thing that I said for Romeo Doubs. This dude's only been a wide receiver his whole career, so I don't really know if he should have overpaid, but sometimes you got to pay to bring some players to the worst organization. They got Jermaine Johnson, the trade that I mentioned earlier. They got John Franklin Myers, who looked good for the Broncos this season, on a 3-year, $63 million deal. Cordell Flott from the Giants for a 3-year, $45 million deal. Alontae Taylor signed a 3-year, $60 million deal. I think they really patched up that secondary, and I think that they could actually be a threat on defense, but their offense still isn't that good. I would have to say they still need some wide receiver help, but that's what the draft's for. This is before the draft, so I'm going to have to give them... I mean, it really helped out their defense, so I'm going to give them a B, because it did give them a wide receiver one. And I think the draft will patch up the other parts. Next, we got the Broncos. Broncos lost, well, quotation marks on lost some important players because they cut Dre Greenlaw, which I thought was a good player. But then they re-signed Alex Singleton, which I think was good. They re-signed J.K. Dobbins. Other than that, they didn't have any other motion. I think I would just have to give them a C, average. Chiefs, they were the first person to sign to him, which was K9 Super Bowl MVP, which of course the Chiefs did because that's something that they would just do. But they lost way more than they gained. People thought that first signing was going to bring them back to a Super Bowl. This was a really bad free agency. Of course, they got K9 Super Bowl MVP, but they lost their whole secondary to the Rams by themselves. And then they cut Jawan Taylor. And other than that, they didn't have any other money to really do anything to go out and get anyone. And then they brought back Travis Kelce on a $12 million deal. So, I think the Chiefs actually have an F. Because I think that they overpaid on Kenneth Walker and lost a bunch of other pieces. Raiders were another one like the Jets and Titans that went heavily on the defense. Had some good pickups on the offense. Honorable mentions. The Tyler Linderbaum that I talked about, they poached him, I think, which was actually amazing. And they ended up getting Max Crosby back, so that was an amazing one for them. They brought Kwity Paye from the Colts to be alongside Max Crosby, which they didn't know at the time, but they did. They signed maybe a top 3 linebacking duo this season in Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker to similar 3 years, $40 million deals. And then they extended Eric Stokes. I think the Raiders actually, I want to give them an A. Obviously, they still don't have their wide receiver one. They end up actually signing Jalen Nailor, which to a 3-year, $35 million. He's obviously not wide receiver one, maybe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, but they still got Trey Tucker over there. And I think they draft Fernando Mendoza second round. They get a high level wide receiver. I think that this free agency was actually pretty good for them. Chargers didn't do anything too crazy. They got some O-line help. They re-signed Trevor Pennon. They got Cole Strange, Tyler Biadasz, Trey Pipkins. They brought back Khalil Mack. But other than that, it was just a lot of re-signing. And now that their O-line's healthy, they should look pretty good. I would just say quite average them. Then next up, we got the Cowboys. Cowboys was a little strange. They did a lot of trading this offseason. But they obviously franchise tagged George Pickens. They traded a 4th-round pick for Rashawn Gary. They signed Kobe Durant, Jalen Thompson from the Cardinals, which was kind of underrated. But other than that, I didn't think it was anything too crazy. Again, they didn't have too much money to work with, so I'll go with C. Giants actually kind of had a sneaky offseason too. Obviously, they're building the New York Ravens over there, which on Harbaugh, but They got Darnell Mooney for a 1 year, $10 million deal, which I think he could easily be a nice wide receiver two that to fill in where Wandale left. Isaiah Likely is actually a really good pickup, I think, because he looked really good behind Mark Andrews. He just didn't get the time that he wanted with the Ravens, but he actually has a lot of potential. I think him and Jackson Dart could have a connection that is unlike any other, and I think that they could be really good. Then some O-line. They brought back Jermaine Alluramore and Evan Neal. Then they signed linebacker Tremaine Edmonds from the Bears, which I think was an okay because they cut their other linebacker, which I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of, but Tremaine Edmonds played at a pretty high level last season. And then Greg Newsome was also a pretty good signing. Obviously, he was traded to the Jaguars at the trade deadline last season, and then they only signed him for a 1 year, $8 million deal. Honestly, I kind of want to give the Giants an A because I think that they did all that they could with their money and they could patch up those holes in the draft. Eagles actually did not do anything. It took the third day of free agency where they signed Tariq Woolen from the Seahawks, which this dude wouldn't even be on a team if they lost that NFC Championship game because bro actually sold on that touchdown from Puka. So honestly, I think the Eagles are going with the F. They didn't do anything else except for that. That's the only thing they really did that was important that they signed, and it was not a good signing. If you look at the first day of free agency, you would think, yeah, the Commanders are getting F here. But honestly, they kind of locked in on that second and third day, and they had some big honorable mentions from that. They brought in Rashard White, which I don't know the deals on that one, but they brought back Dynami Brown, which looked really good Jane Daniels' rookie year before he went to the Jaguars. They brought in Chiga Okonkwo, which looked good at times with Tennessee. They extended Lermy Tunsil. And then their defense actually improved a lot on that second and third day. They signed Chison from the Patriots on a 1 year, $12 million deal. They signed Owe on a 4 year, $100 million deal, which I think isn't worth his production. But they had to get him some way. Tim Settle. And then they brought in Leo Chenal from the Chiefs on a 3 year, $24 million deal. I don't know how the Chiefs couldn't afford that. It's only $8 million a season. He's actually a very high level player. They brought in Nick Cross. I think these moves are actually really good. And honestly, after that first day, I didn't think they were going to do much motion, but I think they get an A for the free agency. And then next up, got the sour order, but got the Bears next. Bears, everyone's making fun of them. They lost most of their defense. And that's true. They didn't really replace anything. Their center retired, but they got a new one in Garrett Bradbury from the Patriots. But other than that, they signed Devin Bush since they cut Tremaine Edmonds. They signed Kobe Bryant from the Seahawks on a 3 year, $40 million deal. But other than that, that's all they did. I don't think it's the worst offseason, but I'm going to have to give them a D. The Lions may have just had almost the worst free agency. Obviously, it wasn't that bad, but they didn't do anything. They tried to replace Sonic and Knuckles with Sonic and Shadows with Isaiah Pacheco. They got him for a pretty good deal on a 1 year, $1.81 million deal, which actually is pretty good for Isaiah Pacheco production that we've seen him do in the past. Cade Mays, I think, is an underrated signing for their O-line. And then other than that, that's all they really did. They lost Alex Anzalone to the Bucs. And honestly, I think I'm going to have to go with the F here. Packers are next up. Another team that actually didn't lose too much, but they didn't gain too much. All they really did was lose Romeo Doubs. And then they traded Rashawn Gary, but they replaced him immediately with Javon Hargrave on a 2 year, $23 million deal. I don't know how to feel about like a 33-year-old on my D-line, but... And then Zaire Franklin, I think, is underrated that they trade with the Colts for only a 7th round pick. Never mind, it was for Kobe Wooden. Read that wrong, but Actually, I think the Packers actually had a pretty good free agency. They didn't lose too much and they didn't gain too much, but the things that they did gain was pretty valuable, I'd say. Vikings, another team that didn't do too much, but the big name, Kyler Murray, going there on a 1 year deal. They're bringing back Aaron Jones, James Pierre, 2 year, $8.5 million deal. Looks good with the Steelers at times. And honestly, they didn't lose too much. So I think I might have to go with a B for the Vikings. Because they got that competition for JJ. And then other than that, their defense didn't change too much. I wouldn't have to say, and their defense was always good. Falcons here. Another team that made some moves here. A lot of smaller moves. The big one was Tua going there on a 1 year vet minimum. And honestly, that's all they really did. They got some backup wide receivers in Jahan Dotson and Zacchaeus. They did some defensive moves, nothing too crazy. So I think Tua will be good competition for Michael Penix, but they're both just injury-prone left-handed quarterbacks. So I'm just going to have to go with a D. Plus for James Pierce, we don't know what's going to happen with him, and they didn't get any replacement for him, so that's why it's going in D. Panthers, another sneaky team here. Honorable mention, John Mechie, second round pick from the Texans. Rashid Walker went there, which is actually a really good O-line pickup for them from the Packers. Jalen Phillips, they did pay a 4 year, $120 million deal. I think they overpaid, but with these small market teams, they have to overpay. I don't know if he was worth that, but still helped with the defense. Devin Lloyd, they got there on a 3 year, $45 million deal, which I also thought was a pretty good deal. He looked good last season with the Jags. I would have to go with a B. I don't know if it was anything too crazy. Could maybe top a B. You could argue that it could be A. These aren't even in order, but then we got the Saints here. Saints, another good one. Travis Etienne was he with the 4 year, $52 million. We'll have to see, but he's a good running back at times. Caden Ellis from the Falcons on a 3 year, $33 million deal. Another good pickup, I would say. Julian Blackman, another good pickup. Honestly, the Saints could also be in A or B. I might have to put them in B. Then we got the Bucks. They didn't do anything too crazy. They signed Alex Angeloni. I think was a good signing. Kenneth Gainwell was also a good signing, but it was just kind of average. And then we got the Cardinals here. Cardinals didn't do anything too crazy. They got Isaac Samamalu for their O-line. That was a pretty good pickup. Tyler Algier to compete for that RB1 position that's there. Gardner Minshew for QB2, I guess, because I don't know what they're doing for quarterback. But I still think that it's like a D. Rams actually filled up all their positional needs really wellly. They obviously traded for Trent McDuffie, but then they went out and signed Jalen Watson, which was corner 1 and 2 for the Chiefs, which I think is really funny. And then they re-signed Cam Curl on a 3 year, $36 million contract. And for that, I'm going to give them an A. They kind of filled all their needs. They could use some O-line depth, but that's for the draft, I would say. Then 49ers, I would have to say that they were okay. They signed Mike Evans. That was the big name. They took him away from the Bucks. They brought back Dre Greenlaw, which was cut by the Broncos, but he's coming back home. And those are really the honorable mentions. Another one's Nate Hobbs I just saw. I would have to say average. Nothing too crazy. And the Seahawks are another one of those teams like the Eagles, which they just won the Super Bowl, but they lost most of their secondary, or at least a good chunk of it. And then they lost Kenneth Walker. Zach Charbonnet may not be back to halfway through next season. And all they did was re-sign Josh Jacobs, re-sign Rashid Shaheed. And then for that running back, they signed Emmanuel Wilson, which was a backup for the Packers. I think it was a pretty strange offseason for them. I mean, they just won. They kept most of their offensive pieces and their defensive pieces, but I was expecting a little more to try to make that two-peat. But this is the list. I would kind of want to say I kind of want to put the Panthers up there at A. But other than that, this is the list. Some casual takes probably, as I always say. But if you guys enjoyed by that, I mean, if any single person in this world saw this video, which they probably did not. But if you did, you liked it, a like would be appreciated. Subscribe, comment. But thank you to anyone who watches. Probably no one. But if you did, see you.